Okay, are we more or less? I feel like we can start now. It's been 6 minutes. People are still coming in.
Oh, look, I just spilled tea on the
Oh
floor.
my gosh, there's so many more people with ADHD than I
Can you
ever
switch to
imagined.
the volume off? Oh, even mute.
Oh, cool. Okay, shall we? Yeah, let's roughly begin then. So, as I'm admitting people, hello, my name is Nora, and I have ADHD. No, just size two though, but just kidding. So I met Anastasia, who is in the. Anastasia, do you want to give a little wave?
Hi.
So I think we spoke for the first time like a month ago, didn't we? I was looking for an ADHD coach who sort of worked in creative industries and knew what was going on. A lot of the people that I spoke with were giving me advice on how to, work in an office and like how to get on with my coworkers. And I was just like, this is alien to me. Like, what is an office? What are coworkers? So I was looking for someone who could sort of be relatable and help me. And I think you really did that and stuff. And that's why I'm so excited to be doing this chat today and for you to, share some of what you know with all these amazing people, because it really helped me like understanding my brain better and also just like helping me cope in this time, because this is a really shit time. And this lockdown is hard. Raise your hand if this lockdown is hard.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so I'm really excited for that. And then just a little bit about me, if you don't know a bit about my work. I started doing this ADHD project in the summer because I was not doing anything. And I was like, okay, so if I do this project about ADHD, it'll help me like get over the bad symptoms of my ADHD. And so like somehow that's actually worked. And it's going really slow now, obviously, hard to meet people. But yeah, things are going well. Trying to make a podcast. Anyways, that's about me. I guess, do you want to kick it off? Oh, and also really quick, I think we'll have a chat for, Anastasia and I were talking before and we said like for 45 minutes or so. And then we'll do questions at the end. But if you have any questions during the time, just like whack them into the chat. And either if it's like a good moment, I'll bring it up then, or we'll do it at the end as well. So any and all of your ADHD questions, whack them in the chat. And yeah, some people have just joined. So I'll said in the beginning, if you have things to doodle during, do that. And yeah, enjoy. I'll put myself on mute now.
We good? Everybody can hear me okay? My mic's all right for everybody? Nod? Awesome. Wow. Thank you, Nora. Clearly you've hit a hot button with your community, and I'm super excited to be here with you. Normally I do one-on-one coaching or very, very small group, but there's a lot of you, and I'm really excited that you're here. I'm a little bit worried I'm going to be super general and jump around everywhere, and I want you to know that I'm not going to leave you hanging. That if there are topics and things that I touch on that I can't really get into very much today, we can organize another one of these, or you'll have access to my email, and maybe I can email you directly with your question, with answers to questions. I have been, like Nora said, I've been working for a long while with creative people as a creative person myself, in advertising and marketing and such. And I too have ADHD. So I'm with all of you with ADHD and with ADHD traits. So I live with it every single day. I was diagnosed about 10 years ago. And it made a massive difference in my life. Whether you get a formal diagnosis or you have ADHD traits, the reason I became a coach is because it's so positive and forward thinking. You help clients sort of achieve what they want to achieve. And I think, and what makes me a little bit nervous about today is that every single one of you have a different brand of ADHD. Every single one of you. And it's all awesome. And it's also really all terrifying. So I'm hoping that I get to a few topics that resonate with you. Maybe you'll leave with a little bit of something. And then if you want, if this is useful, we can continue with more specific topics in the coming weeks. Whatever helps. I want to be helpful. And I think that's why I got into this. But I love what I do, and I love creative people. And they're so, watching the frustration of artists and creative professionals in the industry navigate day-to-day life is what made me realize how underserved your community is. But as more and more is learned about ADHD and more about the link, the neurobiology of how your brain functions and where that lives in your world, how it affects everything from amazing work that you produce to extreme depression, anxiety, and the link between the two. I was telling Nora before we started that I came across some information just in the last 2 days that I think will deserve its own workshop, because it is so fascinating, but it has to be reframed so people can understand it, or so my clients can understand it. So I'm going to touch a little bit on a few things today, just like you saw in your the Eventbrite layout, and then and we'll go from there. So as I mentioned, I think the very thing that makes you incredible at what you do, and I'm assuming most of you are artists or creative professionals, the very thing that makes you exceptional at what you do is the very thing that can cause you so much grief and angst. And learning how to live with those two things is very challenging. But the one thing I always stress with creative professionals who are having a hard time fitting into a neurotypical world is that don't make this a character flaw or a moral judgment. So the fact that many creative people or people with creative brains can't balance their checkbook, have a really hard time dealing with coworkers, deadlines are a massive problem, that these aren't moral failings. It is simply a function of how your brain is wired. And at this point, I think I should clarify, when I talk about creativity versus the creative brain, right? So the creative brain is wired creative. Whether or not you make a living doing or making or creating, it is very, very common with folks with ADHD. Creativity is maybe something that is a little bit too vague, in the sense that everybody's creative in some way or another, but artists are wired creative. Your brain functions differently, and they know this to be the case because you can now measure it with fMRIs, which are basically, it's a functional magnetic resonance image. So they can see things happening in your brain, what lights up, what parts of your brain are doing what at what time, right? And so when I talk about creativity, I'm talking about people with creative brains. So people who are wired creative. That's not to say, creative people can't be accountants, but if you're creative and you're an accountant, it could be like, if you do creative accounting, it's a problem. You're probably going to go to jail. So we're not going to, go there. But you heard me use the word neurotypical. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. That refers to probably 75% of the population, or a little bit more, whose brain functions in a neurotypical way. So people who are neurodivergent, so people with ADHD, people with autism, or on the Asperger, so everything on sort of the autism spectrum. I would refer people with ADHD as neurodivergent. And the really beautiful explanation I can give you is that you can connect the dots, you see patterns in things and create stuff out of nothing. You bring things together to create something out of nothing. And those of you who are artists, maybe you can identify with that. People with ADHD who are able to see things nobody else can, patterns and amazing relationships between things in a way that neurotypical people cannot. And when you learn what that looks like for you, it's extremely powerful and really quite amazing. One of a great quote I've seen, I don't know who I need to credit this with, but maybe Ned Hallowell, who's sort of the premier doctor of ADHD information. And he expresses in ways that people understand, is that, I think he may have said this, is that creativity is impulsivity gone right? So in order to create stuff out of nothing, you have to have you have to have impulsivity in your brain, and sometimes even uncontrolled impulsivity. And that's also part of ADHD, right? So impulsivity allows you to do stuff nobody's ever done before and take risks and do amazing things. But impulsivity can also make you overspend, overeat, and over-medicate, right? So the question is, how do you balance these things in your life without letting the negative stuff take over the things that allow you to do the most amazing creative stuff that you possibly can? And I'm not sure I'm being very eloquent here, because like I said, I'm being a little bit general, and I hope that if there's interest that we can do a little bit more on this. I am not a neurobiologist or a neurochemist. This is simply ADHD training and a whole lot of connecting of information out there and how it relates to ADHD. So I rely on ADHD science, but people who've written books on introversion or how artists function or all that kind of stuff, I often look at this stuff and say, okay, this is how it relates to ADHD. This is how, pattern recognition, that kind of thing. So I think when I talk about pattern recognition, that you see things that nobody else does, is that often if you have ADHD, you can go into a zone where it looks like distraction, but basically what you're doing is connecting dots all over the place. And that dot connection or relationships between completely unrelated things is what allows you to create. Does that make sense to you? Kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything
right.
coming together. And then And yeah, just like, yeah, okay.
So to do really simple neurobiology is that your brain is off. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I hope, and if there are any out there, you're going to correct me. But this is the simplest way to sort of describe the brain. You have your frontal cortex, which manages all your executive functioning. All right. And by executive functioning, we talk about things like prioritization, figuring out what's, time management, sort of those really very specific, almost organizational things, right? This is the new brain, right? It's not, it is, well, I'll explain now, the rest of your brain. And it is generally the emotional brain. It's less, it is more impulsive, it's emotional. That part of the brain regulates emotional response, impulsivity, distractibility, sort of the older parts of your brain, the more, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost an unconscious part of your brain. Your memory lives there too, right? But what happens is that in an ADHD brain, that emotional part of the brain is much more active, and in a lot of cases overactive, right? So, and in some cases underdeveloped, right? Depends if you're talking about children, adults, what it might look for you. So here you have this part of the brain that organizes things, makes lists, gets everything, all that. And then you have this part of the brain that is so, it's like a giant, there's just so much going on. There's a lot of feeling and emotions and things. In order to be an artist and in order to create, that emotional brain, the limbic system here, the limbic system needs to be active, right? And if your limbic system is not activated, you cannot create, right? So it's almost as if in order to create, so basically what it's saying is in order to create, your limbic system has to be overactive or has to be able to take over your prefrontal cortex. Because if the world was run by accountants, we'd never have really other beautiful stuff. Of course, we need accountants because, other things taxes and stuff. But in order to create, your limbic system has to override your prefrontal cortex at certain times. It's when that limbic system has a full run of your house that you have a problem, right? And in that limbic system, you have beautiful things can be created. It's the place of imagination. It's a place of pattern recognition. It's also a place of deep, deep darkness. And in there, you can have a problem with switches. And I'm not going to get super into that today because I want to give it its due. But it would make sense. Well, what made sense to me is that the reason why creative professionals, artists and such, can have such a hard time in the real world is because that limbic system overrides your executive functioning a lot. And when it does, we judge ourselves in a way that is out of control many times. May not happen to you all the time, but it's we have to be able to somehow understand how these things function in order to understand our emotions and how we live or how we function in this world. And so when I work with creative professionals who say, you know, I can't sit in a meeting, or my feelings get hurt all the time, or I don't know how to get along with people, or I can't deal with deadlines, or, you know, you spiral into depression, or all kinds of other things that happen, especially with ADHD. We learn about what this looks like for them and how to override or how to be able to control that limbic system in a way that both allows you to do what you needed to do, but not let it get out of hand, right? So with ADHD, you may have heard that people call it an executive functioning disorder, or that's there are other names for it, but that somehow that you can't plan, you can't organize, you can't prioritize, a lot of can'ts. And those skills or those impediments are a part of ADHD, and it's a neurobiological thing. Now, everybody has a little ADHD, let's just say. But the difference between ADHD is that it is characterized, or you have to see what is the level of impairment, the duration of the problem, and how does this affect your life? So for example, being depressed is not the same as sad, right? Sad or being sad sometimes on okay, even depressed, like, maybe this is not the best example, but everybody's depressed a little bit sometimes. The difference is, how does it impact your life? How often does it happen? How strong is it? And how does it impact your life? Same thing with ADHD. And so everybody's ADHD is different, even creative people, right? So, and I'm just looking at these notes because I really want to keep myself on track here. I've really oversimplified the neurobiology of this, because there's also chemistry involved as well. And like I said, before I introduce this in a much bigger way, it would need to be sort of, I want to combine it so it's easily understood, because like I said, this information that I got is exceptional, and I really want to be able to spread it to you guys, because it directly affects people like artists. So fine artists or theater, people who typically can have a really hard time in life with various problems. Is that sort of like the difference between your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex? Does that make sense to you guys right now at a very basic level? Two parts of the brain.
Yeah.
Part that's
And I like
organizing
how you said, like the old brain and the new brain, sort of
Yes.
the part that's like that almost primal, emotional, subconscious. And then there's that organization, that part that's meant to work in this modern, productivity economy. That doesn't always, maybe we're just not supposed to work in that environment.
Well, that, and educate those neurotypical people about neurodivergence, and luckily that's starting to happen. So how to make this work for your company, how to make it work for you, and I say company because so many creative people do work in some kind of a structure. ADHD and freelancing, I mean, Nora and I have talked about this, so that's like a whole other ball game too, when you don't have a structure. And structure isn't always fabulous, but you have to make it work for you if you have ADHD, and that's where sort of individual stuff comes into play. You wanted to know about I mentioned pattern recognition, about the ADHD brain. You probably have found yourself being able to connect things that nobody else can. Like, how does this piece of clothing relate to a tree that I saw? Like, and then it becomes like a thing in your head. It could even result in a piece of art, but it's like, this is constantly happening, and it's constantly happening in your brain, constantly. And this is really awesome when you can harness it. So when I say pattern recognition or connecting the dots, people who are, you see it a lot in entrepreneurs, like really, like Richard Branson, for example, to use probably somebody you'd recognize, is that guy's crazy. But that guy, he connects dots all over the place. And so he can create products and services that nobody else could possibly come up with, right? But he doesn't do it in a neurotypical way. It's very, very, like, he's all over the place. You see him, he's constantly moving. That's just the way he does it. Now, he's lucky because he's now made billions, so he has everybody to do everything that he doesn't want to do. And now he can just do what he's super good at. But he's a classic example. Somebody can see patterns in things that nobody else does in order to provide or solve a problem for the world, or just whatever. There's all kinds of ways of looking at this. Again, I'm really glossing over a lot of stuff. And again, everybody's ADHD is very different. So hopefully I'll be able to, for those of you who don't know anything about this, this might be useful information. So that's a bit about pattern recognition. Something you'll recognize, and you asked me to talk about flow and recovery. Something that you all will probably identify with is hyperfocus. And hyperfocus is when you get into a task and you can't, like, you just have to stay in there. Like, some people call it, I'm in the zone, I'm in the flow, that kind of thing. Flow is a little bit different than hyperfocus. Hyperfocus is usually, you might get into it whether you like it or not. You might get into hyperfocus. With flow, you really want to be there. You're doing something that is just like, there's more neurochemicals involved, that kind of thing. Both of the hyperfocus is related to transition issues with ADHD. That's moving from task to task. But both hyperfocus can be harnessed, and as can flow. Now, for purpose of simplicity today, we can say that hyperfocus and flow are very similar. And you've all experienced having a deadline. Maybe you needed to finish pieces for an end of the year show, or you've had a really serious deadline in an ad agency or something like that. So these things put you in a state of extreme pattern recognition. It's like good stress. You love being there because there's a lot of neurochemicals floating around in your brain that are really feel-good chemicals. Like, they're amazing, right? And sometimes it's hard to get into states of hyperflow or hyperfocus or whatever, but you can harness that as well. And of course, that's another discussion as well. But one of the things that's really important about this state, and a lot of artists, particularly artists, don't realize, is that when you come out of this state of flow or and flow is usually longer than hyperfocus, but when you come out of, say, 3 or 4 days of extreme
Ooh. Anastasia? Right. I think she has left for a moment.
Okay, I'm
Oh,
back.
there we go.
I don't know what
Okay.
happened. Anyway,
Hello.
sorry about that. Flow. All right, let's get back into this. When you
Yeah.
come out of that phase, you feel like this down. You might feel depressed. You may feel like really negative. It's negative. And the reason why is because there's a whole lot of neurochemicals that just stopped coursing through your brains. And what happens is your body's basically in a hangover state, right? Or withdrawal state. So it's really important for creative people after they come off of this flow state or hyper-focus state, that they take really good care of themselves. They take really, really good care of themselves, because this is where danger happens. People who come out of this state and don't take care of themselves, there's a whole lot of rumination that can happen. There is, you can fall into a dangerous depression. So I always, on a very simple level, is treat yourself as if you've been drinking all night long, right? What do you do the day after? You take it easy. Don't expect a whole lot from yourself. Eat and drink properly. And everybody's different. You may need a little bit more time or a little bit less time. And expect a rebalancing of neurochemicals. So it is a withdrawal, right? So it's both the hangover feeling, so you could feel sick, all that, just exhausted, or you're also experiencing neurochemical withdrawal. So when you expect that, you can set it up for yourself. You're not going to attribute it to some sort of character thing, because people who fall into a depression after these things get into really, really, really deep, dark places. And when you understand that it's a function of what your brain is doing to rebalance, it's a lot easier to understand why your body's doing something. So you can attach it to something, right? And you don't immediately start thinking, oh my God, I'm awful. This work was bad. Like all that stuff, all the deep, dark places that people can go to from the past or just from your latest project, right? So when you know to expect it, you can make adjustments in your life and activities, and it doesn't catch you by surprise. And for neurotypical people, they bounce back super fast, but they also don't go into the intensity of hyperfocus and the intensity of flow is not as intense for neurotypical people, right?
Oh, I think we lost you again, Anastasia. Yeah, that's
Okay,
actually
I'm back.
something. Oh, you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Considering there's a IT person in this household, this is not good. Anyway, so when neurotypical people bounce back easier. So when you come out of an intense period of work or creation of something, or handling really emotionally stressful situations, if you're taking care of elderly parents or a sick child, or you're experiencing super high state of hyper awareness for a long period of time, be aware that this can happen, and don't let it take over don't let it take over your brain and tell you that this is not something that should be, that there's something wrong with you. Just take care of yourself as if you had been drinking all night or more. Depends on what you need. Depends on where you're at. But don't go, that'll help you not go to the deep, dark places that can happen. So that's flowing. So that's a little bit about flow and recovery. There's a whole lot more out there. That there's an exceptional podcast that I'll send. Did I send you a link to that podcast, Nora? I might have.
Yes, you did.
It's
And I can share it in the
fantastic
chat
explanation of how flow is. And it's not necessarily for people with ADHD that he's talking to, but if you have ADHD, this will resonate with you like nothing else. Because you will understand the feelings, but to have somebody explain to you what's happening to you neurochemically is exceptional, because I had no idea, right? You just think that your brain is like not great and you are a bad person, but you're not. It's just your brain doing crazy stuff. So that's a little bit about flow and recovery, and there will be access to this particular podcast, which will be fascinating to many of you, I'm sure. So, like I said, I'm not a neurobiologist. There's a whole lot we could talk about the neurochemistry. I'm going to try and set something up that makes things easier to understand. But there's a lot of practical aspects to why you're here, right? You want to know how to get things done, you know why you can't get stuff done, how to get started on things, how to have a good brain day. Like that's not my phrase, that's Nora's phrase, and I love it. It's like how to have a good brain day. So before we get into sort of the more practical things, let's get started on how to have a good brain day. I'm sure you've heard it ad nauseum. You have to eat properly, exercise, and get enough sleep. And those things are really great. And you've all heard them a million times, but getting it is a whole other ballgame, right? It's a very complicated thing. Everybody's different. But the reason why, there are a few things that you can hack in order to get there, because not everybody's gonna sleep. Oh, by the way, I should say this, is the whole idea of coaching and learning about ADHD is not so that you can fit in with the neurotypical world, right? Like, it's just not, it's not worth it. In fact, they could learn a few lessons from people with ADHD, a lot of lessons actually. So when I talk about tips, tricks, hacks, it's not from the perspective of an executive coach or what works for neurotypical people. Because I can say, go get great sleep, right? But that means nothing to an ADHD person whose brain is running like a freight train 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You could say, put on your timer, go to bed at the same time every night. That's great. And I'm sure it'll do wonders, but to get to that point is very different than somebody who's neurotypical, right? And that's something that never, ever, ever forget, is that your brain is different from 75, 80% of the world. And not everybody thinks and has the same challenges as you do. So don't be hard on yourself. Like it's for real. So anyway, like back to getting started. So back to sort of the practical things, how to have a good brain day. Be super careful about, and I'll jump down to prioritization, because prioritization can exhaust the ADHD brain. In fact, it does exhaust the ADHD brain without getting into sort of, the the biology of this. Every time you have to make a decision or prioritize,
Yeah. Also, I'm loving this chat, everyone. This is great. I'm learning so much. Hi, Rachel.
Yeah, there will be some splaining
Yeah.
to do here. Every time you have to make a decision or prioritize something, it tires out the ADHD brain that much faster, way faster than a neurotypical brain. And what I mean, and it's not just big things, in fact, it's all the little things. So executive coaches for neurotypical people will often say, tackle your hardest stuff first in the morning. That often really freaks the ADHD brain out. Why? Because it requires a lot of decision making, prioritization. Take email, for example, right? What happens is most people roll out of bed and they immediately pick up their phone and they start scrolling through emails, text messages, Instagram, and what else. And for a neurotypical person, this is no big deal. For a person with ADHD, it immediately starts feeding stuff into their brain. You're trying to decide who gets answered, what gets commented on. And every time you do that, it reduces your brain. The only explanation I have, and I know this is not the proper explanation, but it uses up too much brain juice, right? So in a neurotypical person, they've got enough brain glucose, brain juice to supply them for an entire day. If you have ADHD, it's usually gone by noon. So you have to be careful how you use that stuff. Now, stimulants help, by the way. We haven't gotten to the medication thing, but when you wake up, if the first thing you do is have to decide on whose email gets answered, what Instagram post gets posted on, what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, all that stuff, these things all deplete you. And if you want to save your energy for important stuff, good stuff, you will, one, avoid as much prioritizing first thing in the morning as you possibly can. Okay, so I'm talking you're still in bed, right? So routinizing as much stuff as possible. So like what you're going to wear. And that doesn't mean you decide what you're going to wear the night before. It means whatever you want it to mean. It means you wear the same thing every day of the week. There's a reason why artists wear black all the time. One, because it doesn't clash with their stuff. And two, because they don't have to think about matching things. And that's prioritization, right? And the more decisions you have to make, the worse it is for your brain. So routinizing certain things, even to the point where you don't even have to think about it anymore, right? You're on autopilot. If you can get yourself on autopilot for the really normal stuff, you'll save all your energy for later. I'm watching these comments come up and they're going to be really hilarious. So anyway, routinizing as much as possible. And again, I work with clients individually on what that looks like, but I can assure you that looking at your emails first thing in the morning is a very, 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 very bad idea. So at least give yourself some time to wake up. If you take medications in the morning, let it kick in. That's good. But even throughout the day, being able to just sort of autopilot as much as possible is great. It saves your energy for the things that you need it to be. Everybody's in a different situation. People with kids in the house have a whole other ballgame to deal with. But if that's a very simple thing you can do. Breakfast is, some people tell you it's essential for you to have protein with your medications and things like that. that's individual. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But try not to make breakfast something that you have to think about every day. Like if you have to go into the kitchen and say, I should be doing this, I should be making myself this fabulous, high protein, whatever. Don't bother. Just think about it. Even if it means that you have a stack of breakfast bars that you don't have to think about that are in your fridge. So again, routinizing the things that can be routinized. And so to save your energy for creative work, very specifically creative work. If you go to an office to go to work, that might look a little bit different than if you're a freelancer going to work. There's a lot of creative people work alone. And
could you actually delve into that a little bit, Anastasia?
Sure.
Because I've been seeing some questions pop up about freelancing, and
Yes.
I'm looking at the chat and I'm like, I think almost everyone here is a freelancer.
Yeah.
So that would be really, really useful.
So I want to distinguish freelancing from remote work. Freelancing means freelancer or independent business, that kind of thing, is different from a remote worker. Usually if you're a remote worker, or you're accountable to somebody else, right? If you, a freelancer or somebody who runs their own business, like a solopreneur, would be accountable to their clients, right? Or to themselves, which is really hard. So I'm going to focus on, since you said that most people are freelancers, I won't talk about going into an office. It's the ADHD brain is built to create stuff and is really well matched to being an entrepreneur or a freelancer or that sort of thing. But because there is very little accountability in those types of situations, our limbic system can get really super active. In order to, if you're going to work as a freelancer, you have to set up systems for yourself. And by systems, I don't mean classic executive, whatever workplace systems. I mean like cues and environments that will unconsciously propel you to work or to go to work, and that can look like it's both setting up the right physical space, but it's also setting up the right cues to get there, right? So for many people, getting up from bed unconsciously propels you to a shower, unconsciously propels you to go get something to eat, and then propels you to get your coat on, walk down the street, get a coffee from the place you always get your coffee from, and then go to your studio. And if any one of these things gets messed up, it can really mess with your day or wreck your day, right? And none of these things are that problematic, like taking a shower, getting coffee. But if those cues are so strong for people with ADHD that if you take them away, they will mess with your head and mess with your day, right? And they're like mile markers or posts, you get there, you move on to the next one. You get there, you move on to the next one. So if you are a freelancer or somebody who's accountable to clients and themselves, setting up these mile markers, these posts are essential. And they look different for everybody. And they're not your typical executive coach type things sometimes, right? Because also you may not be working the 9-to-5 job. In no world should you have to start early ever, right? I mean, that's the whole idea why you probably work for yourself. But you making sure that you set up these almost like boundaries to make sure you get to the place you need to go to. And they're usually an unconscious type thing. So buying a coffee, like who would ever think that buying a coffee means you will go to work? But that's true, right? Or making coffee. You see these patterns of behavior. If you all think about yourself, like if you're working in a studio, like, do you have a pattern of how you get yourself to do something or how to start work? Or the big challenge is how to get yourself to start something. That's a whole other ball game, right? Do you want me to move on to that part, Nora?
Oh no, I was just wait, because you said wave when a bit of time has gone. So
Yes.
I was just
Okay,
waving.
Good. Okay, good. All right. So having a good brain day means setting up systems and setting up these mile markers and cues so that you don't have to think about the mundane stuff. You don't have to make decisions about the mundane stuff, right? And then you can just save all of your energy for the thing that you need the energy for, whether it's creating, whether it's just functioning, whether it's being with your family if they're a challenge, or any of that, right? Any part of your day, you can save that energy for that. If you find yourself having a low, always check in with yourself. Have I eaten? Am I hungry? The usual stuff. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? And if you need, sometimes 30 jumping jacks will do it. I saw somebody earlier around like hopping up and down. That'll reset things for some people, right? Again, I'm really glossing over this, but these are just like little quick hints and also to make you realize that your brain should not have to function with neurotypical hints and hacks and tricks, because it probably isn't going to work, right? So that's why I do what I do. Getting started on things, the ADHD brain often requires a much longer runway, right? So you think of planes, right? Smaller planes, they can take off on a short runway. Larger planes need a long runway to take off. The ADHD brain needs a long runway. And it doesn't necessarily mean a long amount of time. It just needs to have the flexibility to get where it needs to go. Now, along that runway, there are certain things you can do to make sure you take off, right? It depends on what you're about to do. If you're about to attempt something that is really challenging, normally for like your taxes, and you've been avoiding it for 10 years or whatever, you may need different things along that runway in order to get you up in the air. If you are having a hard time taking along that runway, and you really want to do something that you love to do. So if you want to create pieces, or you've been asked to create something, or you have a deadline that is within the thing that you're really good at, sometimes the ADHD brain doesn't want to take off because it's afraid of, that's where like afraid of failure, past experiences with the same type of, job, or those things can get in the way. And there are ways to hack that. And sometimes it's a time thing. So thing about ADHD is there's two things. There's now and not now, right? Planning ahead is really difficult. You may have dreams and ideas, but the plan to get there is now or not now. That's right. What's the one thing I can do now, Right. I think you've seen those on your posts, right? So along this runway, you don't need to see the final end result. You need to just simply like, what's the next, like you just saw in the post-it. What's the next thing? What's the one next thing? Step by step by step. Because the ADHD brain knows now or not now. You can train it, but now or not now. And it's purely neurobiological, right? So there are exceptions to this. But for the most part, every ADHD brain has a pile of stuff that they just can't wrap their head around. Either they can't start it, and sometimes once they start it, they can't stop, which is great. So sometimes it's just the getting lift off that's the problem, but it's enough to stop you from doing all kinds of great things, right? That time on the runway, like, can be very difficult, but there are skills and things that can be put into place that are friendly to the ADHD brain that will help you. So remember, you need a longer runway. There's and part of that is releasing pressure. You know what? I'm not going to go into the releasing pressure things because that's a whole other thing. Be kind to yourself, right? Like, being kind to yourself, you hear that all the time, but being kind to yourself, knowing that your brain is functioning a certain way is super important. We don't get mad at fish for not being able to climb a tree, right? Fish swim, other animals climb trees, right? And when you tell an ADHD person to do certain things that their brain just won't do, this is not a character flaw. It's merely either you have to hack it or you move on to the next thing. So they talk about this with children a lot. Teach into their strengths as opposed to try to improve their weaknesses. Or not improve, but trying to override their weaknesses. So teaching into their strengths, we'll see how that goes in the next 10 years. But adults have to think that way too, right? And yeah, the person who's going to be hardest on you in your life is you. And that's your brain doing that. And just being aware of that and just being able to catch it and identify it releases its hold on you. So again, I'm really like super just slamming a lot of stuff into this 45 minutes. If you want more, I'll give you more. But
should we move on to questions?
Yes.
Anastasia?
Yeah, because I'm good at question answering.
And I feel like there's probably loads of questions that are going to come up, and
I'm sure there are. Yeah.
So if anyone has any questions, either you could just like ask it yourself by unmuting yourself, or if you're shy, that's cool too, and you could just post it in the chat. But I was thinking, so Anastasia, I got a couple of questions. Can you hear me well, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got a couple of questions prior to this call. So I'm just going to ask a couple of those now.
Okay.
And yes, either ask them yourself or post them and blah, blah, blah. So, actually, let's see. One of them is, so I think I got quite a few questions here. So,
okay.
But the first one is, can you learn to cope/thrive with ADHD without medication? This person said, I privately tried one type, which badly affected my mental health, and I can't afford to continue private treatment. So I'm hoping to try other avenues.
Absolutely. It means a lot of experimentation to determine what works for you. You exercise. There are about 20% of people who take medication, and I'm specifically talking about stimulants, not the non-stimulants. There are all kinds of other things nowadays, but for whom stimulants do not work. And for those people, exercise. like 2 times a day or run on the treadmill before a meeting, because you're able to get your it's about dopamine, right? So again, that's a lot longer discussion, but for people who have had a bad experience with medication, exercise, like strenuous exercise, or get your cardio type exercise. And it can be as simple as lots and lots of jumping jacks every, 20 minutes. Or I know people who do CrossFit twice a day. Runners.
Twice a day. Sorry,
Yes.
I just had to interject.
Yeah, it's crazy.
For a moment.
Yeah, crazy. But that's how that's how they handle, it works for them. There are often people who, with ADHD who start running, who have to reduce their stimulant dosage because the runner's high or the dopamine is sufficient, and even too much if you got stimulant going. So it's a lot of experimentation. It is 100% possible. It takes commitment and understanding your ADHD really well to determine when you need to exercise, where you are in your life, how hormones may or may not be affecting you, and that sort of thing. So it is doable. It should also be noted that there are one of the reasons why some people have issues with getting treatment with stimulants is because they are a controlled substance in many countries. If that is the case for you, there are also a number of really good non-stimulant medications, which may be easier to get treatment with. But again, it depends on where you are and what your doctor knows or doesn't know. Yeah. So if you want to focus, if you need to focus immediately, try the cardio stuff. For the emotional regulation part of ADHD, that may be something different. But if you've got good dopamine sources from like natural sources, then exercise can be a super great option. And also avoiding sugar and the sort of processed stuff. Like, I'm not saying don't have sugar, but it's the processed stuff that's really problematic. Be careful with other medications and alcohol. So don't self-medicate there. But there's a lot of evidence for omega-3 and vitamin D, B12, that sort of thing. If you are going to use any CBD, cannabis, weed, general stuff, see if you can get some guidance on that. If it becomes a problem, then you know where you're at. It's very dependent on your own neurobiology. It can help, but don't mix it with other medications. Not enough. You have to do that under supervision. Yeah, so short answer, yes, it can be done. Long answer, see if you can continue, if you really want to look at medical management of this, then do that. And also like coaching and therapy works too, alongside exercise. So yeah, I hope that answers that person's question. They can email me directly if.
Someone also asked, so do I have ADHD if meds don't work?
Yes. Meds, like I said, about 10-20% of people do not respond to stimulants, right? In fact, stimulants taken by people without ADHD harm the brain, and they can measure that. So you hear about this all the time. You don't want to mess with the stimulants if you don't have ADHD. because it doesn't help really much, and it hurts. There's stuff that happens that you want to avoid. With the non-stimulants, I'm not as familiar but they're generally less problematic, the non-stimulants, and they're generally not controlled. So, or not controlled substances. So yes, you can have ADHD and not respond. That's right? I answered that question?
Yes, that was a
yes,
question.
you can have ADHD and not respond to
Yes.
medication. Yeah.
Another question that I've got, and again, everyone just like feel free to just unmute yourselves and shout out your questions, because I'm just hearing my voice and Anastasia's voice, so it'd be nice to hear other voices. But another question is it best to lean into the patterns of working creatively with ADHD, i.e. big bursts of energy and slow, unproductive periods? Or should I try structuring myself better and find ways to be more consistent?
The first part of that question is absolutely. You can lean into what works for you. In fact, you should lean into what works for you, as long as it actually works for you.
Hi, I'm gonna ask a question.
Oh,
hey.
Hi.
At the end of the question, the answer. Sorry, I just wanted to ask. Sometimes I can get stuck in loops of like, I don't know, maybe it's like being hyper focused or something. But what is the good way to jog that? Like, I've been writing like step by step lists of like what I need to do during the day and ticking them off. But sometimes they just go astray and I forget to do that. So I don't know.
I think I know what you're talking about. I just want to clarify. So when you talk about loops, do you talk about mental loops or physical loop? Like in your brain, you're just
in my brain. In my brain, I'll be like, okay, I need to do this, and then it's like I'm stuck.
And you're talking about doing tasks or an actual
like doing tasks.
Yeah.
Something.
The best thing for that is to get outside yourself. So if you clearly notice when you're there, and if it's negative for you and you want to move on to the next thing, and it truly is a loop, focusing on something to tell you to change your thought is wrong. What you need to do is get outside yourself. So it could mean focusing on a painting, like look at a painting and count to 20. And what that does is it stops, it's like short circuits that. And again, it depends. If it's just a sort of benign thing you just keep repeating, and you want to move to the next thing, try actually focusing on something else. So if you're sitting in a room, you can look outside and stare at a tree, right? Mm-hmm. And what it'll do is you should be able to, you want to just short circuit that. If it's an emotional feedback loop, you could do the same thing, but there's other things. But if you're just trying to this is assuming that, do you want to move on to the next task, or you just want to continue with the task that you're on?
No, I want to move on to the next task. I mainly get it in the mornings, like when I need to start my day.
Yeah, you can't short circuiting that loop is important. You already have a list, which is great. But sometimes we move, and this is exactly the thing that I learned about the other day, and I really want to do a presentation on this. Your brain goes into this part where, or into a mode where that can happen. And so by just saying, by grabbing it, saying, yeah, I'm in a loop, I'm going to look at this tree for 10 seconds, breathing, just simple breathing, your choice of whatever is comfortable for you. There's sort of those patterns of, breathe in for 5, hold for 3, out for 6 kind of thing. It short circuits because your brain will do that. It'll just like, okay, all right. I don't want to I need to, move along, right? It's like little breaks. So that's one thing. Does that answer your question a little bit in terms of loop? Yeah. Give that a try. Again, it depends on what the loop. Pardon?
I said I'll try that tomorrow morning.
Good. Sure. See how. Let me know how it works for you. It depends on your temperament as well. But there are ways to short circuit this loop.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
I have a question as well.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I recently started taking medication, taking stimulants. And I originally wanted to get it just for productivity purposes, because I would be like way behind or take a lot longer than most people. But as I've started taking it, like I just started last week, I've noticed also like my ability to emotionally regulate is so much better. I mean, I'm a lot less impulsive in the ways that I would want to be less impulsive. I feel like my mental patterns are like a lot more clear. Like it feels, basically what I'm saying is it feels great 9 to 5. And then as it starts wearing off, I just feel kind of like a zombie. Like I feel very, very I can't even like I'm kind of feeling that way right now. Like I can't even like fully, like I'm here, but I don't feel very connected with my emotions at all. And I guess my question is, I don't know exactly what it is, but like I'm navigating whether or not I want to take meds full time, long term. I really like what it's doing, and I also don't know that I want to be in such an like on mode like for my whole life, if that makes sense. So I guess I would like some advice in navigating that. If
Sure. I should let everybody know that I'm not a medical doctor. I do understand a lot about challenges that people have with medication. So I'm not making recommendations to take them or not take them or specific things. But what you've described is very common. And that is, you've got the focus, emotion, and it's really great you've got emotional regulation portion of things, because that's something that many stimulant medications don't work on. But if you,
it super helps with that.
So the issue, what you're explaining is at the end of the day, it's the stimulant crash.
Yeah,
basically.
I crash and like get like headaches, and I become like a non-human.
So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Very common. Now, there's a couple things sometimes that is an indicator of too high a dose.
Okay.
Sometimes it's your body getting used to it. You said it's just been a week, right?
Yeah, like a week or so.
And these are the long acting ones. Like, okay. So generally what happens is, depending on the brand, you should have anywhere from 8, 10, 12, some of they're 14 or 16 hours, right? It depends on your body chemistry and your body metabolism. The thing that happens with the crash is, it's especially common in children, but anybody who takes a stimulant medication, is if you like what it's doing for you during the day, if you feel comfortable, make sure that the dosage has been adjusted for you well, and let your body adjust to it. So like, again, I'm not a doctor. If you really don't like what it's doing, call your physician. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time for your body to get used to it. And if it continues, then adjusting the dose, sometimes adjusting the brand, it really, things vary from like brand to brand. In terms of taking it and being on, it depends on what it feels like to be off, right? So for people who people with ADHD who struggle with emotional regulation, it's very difficult to not take something. Now, there are non-stimulant medications for that. But if you do take a stimulant that does work on that for you, you you want to take it because you know it helps you not just get work done, but also function in the world, you know, and not, you know, and regulate those emotions. So if you don't feel good, call your clinician and see if they can adjust it. Sometimes it's a different, like sometimes certain people do better on a methylphenidate type of stimulant, and some people do better on an amphetamine type stimulant. What's important is really tracking how you feel. If in the middle of the day at where you're the most at peak, if you're going like you're not feeling good when you're taking it and in the middle of the day, then the dose is too high and you need to adjust. And the thing about stimulants is they're not based on your weight or anything like that. They're based on how your body processes them. Like for some people, if they have a coffee with their stimulant, the stimulant doesn't work, right? So those sorts of things to consider. So if you're feeling okay, you might want to give it some time, because it seems like there's a lot of good stuff happening. And if you've got a really great doctor, you can talk about, you know, options. That's a good thing. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time for your body to adjust and make sure that you're getting enough time out of it, in case you have to switch out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
A little bit.
I think.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sometimes adjusting the time you take it, like you don't have to take it first thing. Like nobody says you have to. Like take it at noon if you want. It just depends on how your life.
Taking it like in the long term, I guess that's the other part of my question. That is like, is this supposed to be something that I'm going to be on like forever? You know, that's kind of like, it's a big change in the way that I experience the world.
A lot of this depends on your life. ADHD can be very, very situational. You always have it. The question is what's going on around you and in your life and in your body, what's the, you know, intensity level, duration and level of impairment of your ADHD symptoms. Some people, you know, their life changes in a way that they feel like they don't want to. I'm a huge believer in your intuition and your gut. Like, what does your gut feel like? Do you feel good? Do you not feel good? Like in a way that, you know, do I really need this? So you're not going to be forced to take this for the rest of your life. You can always choose not to, but your hormones will change over time. Your life situation will change over time, and you can adjust as you see fit, because once it's out of your system, it's out of your system, right? You feel it, right? So these are choices that you can make with your physician. And there's some, again, the Hallowell books explain things super well, but if you, it takes some time and some adjustment to really, you know, make yourself feel good if that's where you want to go. And yes, there are 95-year-old people who take stimulants. So
if they make in as well.
Sure, yeah.
So I've been taking stimulants since I guess, what was it, beginning of July of last year, because I had to get the diagnosis, and I was able to get an appointment last minute, like a week after. So that was great. But I also wrote a bit. If you scroll up in the chat, I wrote about that stimulants really don't have to be something you take forever. I know people, like both of my brothers have ADHD. They're like, one of them's on medication, but I know people that are taking it every single day, all week long, all month long for like years. But what I wrote also is it can simply be a stepping stool or one step to get yourself in the right direction, I guess, at least in my case. And it's, you have to, one thing is very important is to always remember, like, okay, how do I feel now? Do I need it now? Do I need it? Do I need less? Do I need more? And, you know, it's a bad day is also not horrible. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's my 5 cents.
Yeah, and you know what? You made a really interesting point there about how much do you need? And it's often very difficult. If you have a good clinician who's willing to understand that you can regulate stuff, particularly if you have hormonal changes throughout the month, you can adjust stimulants according to where you're at. And again, those things will change. They might change for you, may not. It depends on your
Can I interject here, Anastasia?
Yeah, sure.
So speaking about, like, I think you mentioned Ned Hallowell, and one part, I think a couple of people asked in the chat, and seeing as like quite a bit of time has gone now, so I'm going to try to sort of work a little bit speedy because I've got quite a bit of questions. So they asked, considering the difficulties I have with reading, often just being inattentive to slow texts, how is Ned Hallowell to read?
He's really easy to read. In fact, I think Driven to Distraction, he writes the first chapter assuming you won't read the rest of his book.
Yep, it's great.
And or the audiobook is always great. So you don't have to read it all in one sitting. It is meant to be read by people with ADHD. So it's always the one that I recommend because it's so easy to get through. Now, his new version is excellent as well. But if you just want to look at Driven to Distraction or Delivered from Distraction, which are his earlier books, they are fantastic. And if you're not a reader, you should be okay with them. If you, but obviously they're both available as audiobooks as well, if that's something that's easier for you to digest.
And ADHD, and we were talking about this in our last call, weren't we? ADHD 2.0 by Ned Hallowell is now out as an audiobook.
It's fantastic.
And it goes more into about ADHD being like a sensory regulation.
We haven't even gotten into that part.
So that's like a whole, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it would be good to have like a series of these calls because there's so much to go into. And I think that one really does. I'm going to jump forward to the next question.
Good. Yep.
In school, I used to throw biscuits at my teacher and always got kicked out of class for not sitting still. But I found art, and now I'm less like that. But I still find it really hard to do anything other than art. So like invoices, organizing shit is really hard. Sometimes I also have an urge to throw tomato ketchup at people. Not sure where it comes from. Well, do you think I have ADHD?
I won't try and diagnose you based on ketchup and biscuit throwing. However, it sounds it's possible. There's also ADHD traits or variable attention stimulus traits. So if you suspect, and if there's an impairment in your life, if you're not able to get stuff, or it's ruining your life, or these traits are ruining your life, I would highly recommend talking to somebody about this, whether they suggest an assessment. But that I know lots of kids who throw biscuits. Sounds So I would. It's always worth looking into, especially if it is causing problems in your life, for sure. But if it's not, and you're doing okay, then it's okay. Right? Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense to me. Can I jump back to the question? There was another question you were answering before, and I think I might have zoned out in part of it. But it's about working with, leaning into patterns of working creatively with ADHD.
Yes.
So I think the second part of that question was, should I try structuring myself better and finding ways to be more consistent, or sort of going with the flow of working with the ADHD? Did you have any more thoughts on that question?
Right. That's so funny because the last time it got cut off, and I think you froze there too. Leaning into doing what works for you is the right thing. If doing that causes impairment, or your employer doesn't like it, or it is causing problems in your life, then making changes to that or trying to figure out how to hack that is a good idea. Trying to have yourself fit into a neurotypical mold of getting work done. The world is set up for a production-based economy, basically 9 to 5, like who's creative only at 9 to 5? Like, doesn't happen. But if you work for somebody who expects you to be creative 9 to 5, that makes things really difficult. And trying to fit a mold is never a good idea with ADHD, unless there is like a risk to your life or your health or something, you know. But to do work, if you find something that works for you, that's exactly where you should be. And sometimes that's where coaching comes in, where we sort it out together, and also give you some support in making it work for you, because doing stuff that the rest of the world, getting things done in a way that the rest of the world does not get things done, is very tough and can be very overwhelming. So yeah, so there you go. So I don't know if that answers that. There's a lot more to that question, but don't try to force your brain to work in a way that it cannot work. It could do it little bits at a time. Like, everybody has to do their taxes and stuff, or wait in line at the bank and that kind of stuff. I use taxes a lot because I hate doing them. So just sometimes you do have to do things that you don't want to do. But when you're talking about doing the things that you love to do, or the thing that you earn a living doing, you can't force it. You just can't. You can make it work in certain ways. So we'd have to have more of a discussion about various specifics on this particular question. But don't try to force yourself into a hole somewhere. Or,
Yes. Does anyone else have any questions? I have a few more written down. Yes.
Hi. It's kind of what you just talked about, and a point that you kind of skipped over because we were talking about more like freelancing. I'm basically freelance and I've always done that. But I actually want to go more into a structured environment, and I'm petrified because I've been out of it for so long. And I kind of, when I stepped into freelancing, being my own boss sort of thing, I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is actually works brilliant for me. But that's where my ADHD really kicked in, because I didn't have a structure. So it just kind of, that's where I just started to just tumble down. But now I'm kind of like, okay, how can I mix the two? And, you know, there's a bit of the petrified me that's kind of like, am I just going to not be able to integrate into a normal 9 to 5, because my ADHD is going to kick in. I won't be able to do my assignments. I'm never going to turn up on time. I'm going to be late to everything, and it's just going to constantly fall apart. And it's, at the same time, I don't feel a completely structureless freelancing thing is beneficial to me at all, really, even though it's kind of like I'm kind of like a kid with a bowl of ice cream. Like, I think I really want it, and it really is really great, but I now, as an adult, I can see that it just doesn't work for me.
Sure. Yeah. And so your question is, you're worried about integrating into a more structured environment?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a common fear. And also with ADHD, there's a lot of anticipatory anxiety happening. So the question, if we were conversing about this over a course of an hour or whatever, would the job that you're considering into a structure, is it one that you would love to do?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's part of the thing is being able to fit into the work environment is doable. People with ADHD, and I think because you've been out of it for a while, the confidence levels, like you want to be sure that you're going to, like, this is it. And you're probably going to do just fine. It's the anticipatory anxiety, and also creating certain structures around being in a more office-like setting, or in a more traditional, like, working for somebody else. So, so setting up systems and structures and knowing yourself, it will be essential. But if you love what you're doing there and you feel comfortable there, the lighting's good, the sound's good, the people are great, you can make those adjustments. I always worry that if people are taking jobs in a structured environment just to get the structure, that's kind of scary, right? Because it means that like you may not love it there. But if you like the idea of that job, but you're a little bit concerned about going back into a structure, those things can be hacked totally. And in fact, there may be some relief for you, and knowing that, making that awareness, because it'll just be different challenges, right? And so the pressure that you put on yourself to do great work is the pressure that you're putting on yourself now to succeed in a place that you haven't started at yet. And people do it all the time. They flip back and forth. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can always go back to freelance, right?
Yeah.
And it could be, sometimes it's a great break for your brain not to have to worry about. You're basically getting a bunch of accountability people. You're accountable to somebody.
Yeah.
And for some people that's a really comfortable place to be. And that's okay. I'm sure. And it can happen with work. It can happen with your home life or your personal life, all that stuff. So your ADHD it's never going to be up there and stay there, right? Things will affect it differently. But I would encourage you, if that's something, if it's a job that you want to do, you'll be making changes to, like, being able to modify what's going on in your head is totally doable. And as long as you love what you're doing, and that's really important. As long as you love the work that you'll be doing, that'll be good.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. No, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Hi.
Yeah. So hi. So I know imposter syndrome is quite a big thing for people with ADHD, and I just wanted to know, like, is there anything that like helps with like motivation or like getting inspired, like when your imposter syndrome's kicking in? Because I feel like over the pandemic, like, it's affected like so many people, and then people just getting like ruts, and it's like difficult to get out of it.
So ADHD is basically a whole pile of paradoxes, right? And imposter syndrome is very common, and it's related sort of to the self-esteem part of things. The difference, I think, with ADHD, everybody at some point feels a little bit like they don't like that imposter, right? But neurotypical people come out of that very quickly. Like cisgender men come out of it very quickly, because that's, I think that's an okay thing to say. They just move on, right? Like some people could just move on. With ADHD, we sit on it a little bit. We sit on it. We sit on on that, and we ruminate on it. And imposter syndrome is also related to your memory and your previous success and what your brain imprinted, especially if you had a difficult childhood in school or any sorts of those sorts of things. It's a really good thing to work through with a therapist if there's trauma, and a coach, and that's and definitely, like, you want to go to somebody who's trained for that, if especially if there's a lot of trauma. Imposter syndrome in a coaching relationship, we would look at, sometimes people with ADHD need to be reminded of their successes and because we forget a lot of it. And when you really stop, and I know it's hard, it's super hard. and the really great thing about being able to either working with a coach or being with people who are there in understand that, you can be reminded of the things that you have achieved, and what is the positive opposite of imposter syndrome? What is the positive opposite of being, unorganized? Though working with somebody to remind you of that, because the brain, it's not just you forgetting all your successes, is that the negative stuff is much more powerful in an ADHD brain, and it sits there and it covers it up and you forget. And to be reminded of that is really important. And because imposter syndrome is sometimes a coping strategy, so it's really tough. You want to uncover a little bit. If, like I said, if there's trauma, you want to work through it with a therapist. If it's really imposter syndrome that is more like, I'm not sure I want to try this because I don't know, or I might fail. Like if it's related to that area, then it's something that you can work through. And it's such a tough thing for people with ADHD, because it stops people from really putting stuff out in the world. And
can I interject here?
Yeah.
Someone wrote in the chat, and I think this is relevant to what you just said, it stops you from putting things out into the world, but is imposter syndrome linked to self-sabotage?
Officially, I don't know. Unofficially, yes. Because your brain starts developing, lays down patterns. And if you learn from an early age, or if your experience, not necessarily, I'm not saying that your parents told you or a teacher told you or whatever, although it can be common. If you learned from an early age that, or you experience failures, or you're doing things that you can't understand why you don't get it, or you're doing things differently, and that's not and that's a negative thing, then it's possible you just don't believe. Like, also with ADHD, seeing it's like part of, not related to the time thing or the now and not now, but kind of, it's like the dysphoria a little bit of it. I'm not sure a psychiatrist or psychologist would associate those two, like that question, but I do. I think they're all related, and the difference is what the impairments, and because again, we apply labels to ourselves that may not be applicable. So imposter syndrome may be related to the fact that you have a learning disability that was never caught. So you tell yourself, well, I can't read, so I'm not a reader. Or how can I teach kids to read when I have dyslexia, right? Or something like that. I know that's very simplistic and not at all clinical, but I would relate them, definitely. Depends on where they're coming from a little bit. So we'd have to have a much more more of a conversation. Does that make sense a little bit for you, Rochelle?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, it's a much longer conversation, but
Yeah, I know we're almost at 2 hours now, and I'm like, how have all these ADHD people been able to sit here for 2 hours? So I'm thinking we should I'm hungry too, so I'm thinking we should probably think about wrapping up soon, because like I'm getting to my tether. I don't know about you guys. I sat here fidgeting with my little toy. Maybe so I got one more question here in the chat, and then any other questions, Anastasia? Is it cool for people to email you? What would you want to?
Yes. So they can absolutely email me. And I try to get to most questions as quickly as possible.
Or would it be useful if people email me and then I sort of send you an email with all the questions combined, and then we can sort of tackle it, like, so people can see answers to the different questions as well? Or
they can do that, but I think sometimes with stuff like this, especially if they're personal things, I'm okay if you email me directly. I think if you'd like to hear more about certain topics or something that came up that you'd like to learn more about, they should definitely email you, because I think you've hit a hot button. And I feel like I'm leaving a lot of dangling here, and I know I should have more visuals, and I'd like to be able to provide that a little bit. I'm not going to give you a deck, but if there are certain things that you'd like to know more about, maybe they should contact you. No problem.
Yeah, I'm thinking the series. Like, there's so much to go into.
And if you have and like, send me an email. Absolutely. In the subject line, it would be helpful if you just say that you attended this Zoom thing, just so I can make sure that I can address these things, these emails, as quickly as possible. And I always say this when I'm doing, discovery sessions, is that stuff comes up after, right? They go, oh, I wish I could have asked that, or what about this? So I love questions. Send them along. I'm happy. And if you want to see more, Nora has an amazing community thing. Like, this is so great. Like,
I didn't realize there were so many people with ADHD. I'm like, wow.
And also, if people are willing to sort of give me a little bit of an idea about who they are, I could actually create a bit of a questionnaire so that we can get a little bit more drilled down to maybe people's needs. If you're all fine artists, or if you're actors, if you work in a structured environment or not, we can maybe create some very specific things. So send me an email. They can email me from the website.
Yes, so I put your email into the chat. Is hello@creativebrainatwork.com.
That's right.
So there's one more question, and then I think maybe after that we can wrap it up, unless someone like unmutes themselves and shouts out, like, I need to know this answer right now. And that is, the question is, any tips on navigating rejection sensitivity regarding our work/creativity? And this is actually something I asked you last week, Anastasia, because it was coming up for me big time.
Yeah. This is really, really big. It's a great question. Rejection sensitivity is part of hyper awareness and impulsivity in the brain. It's part of it's part of how the ADHD brain functions. It's I'm so glad they're now talking about this, and I'm hoping that this could easily be its own thing. Navigating it depends on who you are and where the rejection sensitivity shows up. And yes, there are ways to do it. Part of it is short-circuiting, like being aware of your emotions when they're coming up and doing that short circuit switch. I think one of the questions that somebody asked, I said, look, you have to get outside yourself. I would really like to be able to provide you with some very concrete tips for that. The thing that you can do, but it may be a little bit before you get that, is you can do some reading on it online. There's a little bit, but a very quick thing is pay attention to what you're paying attention to. And oftentimes, if you really think about that statement and you're looking at rejection sensitivity is very complicated. But the first step is being aware that it's there, and the emotions and the physical sensations associated with it. Because sometimes it happens before something happens, or you're shocked when it happens, or sort of the worry about criticism at work kind of thing. And that part of that is the overactive limbic system. So being able to harness that is really key. Medication can help. There are non-stimulants that work exceptionally well on rejection sensitivity. You probably have seen it. It's called Intuniv or 10X or guanfacine. So a particularly a good ADHD doctor will know about this. So if you're looking for a medication thing, but sometimes it is about retraining your brain and reframing and talking about these things with a coach or a therapist, because it could be simple or it could be complicated. It depends on you, right? So the best thing you can do to short circuit the emotions associated with this is be aware that you're having that emotion. So pay attention to what you're paying attention to. And then that is often enough to short circuit. And also getting outside of yourself. So stare at a tree for 10 minutes or breathing, some sort of a breathing pattern. If we do something on this specifically, I'll be a little bit more specific with the tips or tricks, but often you need to know where it's coming from, and that will give you the power over that emotion or that sort of the bigness of it all, because it's very common. And I'm really, really glad that that somebody brought up rejection sensitivity, because I think we need to do something.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good. And send me an email if you have more specific questions about it. I'm happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're welcome. So we good?
Okay. Yeah. Does anyone else have
right.
any burning questions, or are we all ready for dinner?
I'm ready for lunch.
You're Canada time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone. I can't believe we're still 29 people in the chat. I'm like, wow.
Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Like, I've not ever done this. I've done similar things, but not at like so many people. So I apologize if I wasn't specific, but man, I'd love to see you guys again. And I really, thank you for spending your time with me. I'm really humbled here.
This has been amazing. Anastasia just volunteered to come and share her time and knowledge with all of us. So thank you so much, Anastasia. There's been so much love in the comments as well, in the chat, people saying they have to leave and sending you loads of love.
Thank you. And I'm happy to do it again and send your emails and support Nora in her project, because it's great. What you just did is huge. Seriously.
This is so amazing that there's such a big group of people. So yeah, there's the Discord link, which is in the chat, which is that way, I think. And I've recorded this, so I'll be putting it up if anyone wants to like watch themselves fidgeting. And what else? If you have any questions, DM me as well. And Have says, do one about ADHD and sex next time. I think that's definitely one that needs to be done. Okay. Sending love to y'all.
We didn't even get there. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. I hope to see you again.
Thanks,
okay.
guys.